Chapter 1. The Unexpected Knock. I never expected a simple knock on my door to change everything. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where golden leaves dance on gentle breezes and the air carries the first hints of winter's approach. I was working from home, as usual, lost in the steady rhythm of typing, when 3 soft taps broke my concentration. Sarah Chen had lived next door to me for 5 years, yet we'd never progressed beyond polite waves and brief exchanges about the weather. She was the quiet type, a retired high school teacher who spent most of her time tending to her immaculate garden or reading on her front porch. But the woman standing on my doorstep that morning was different from the composed neighbor I thought I knew. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hands clutching a wrinkled envelope. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help." Those 4 words would lead us both down a path neither of us could have anticipated. A path that would test the boundaries of friendship, challenge our preconceptions about family, and ultimately teach us that sometimes the most profound connections can bloom from the most unexpected moments. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I'll put on some coffee." As Sarah settled onto my worn leather couch, I noticed how her shoulders hunched forward, as if carrying an invisible weight. The morning light streaming through my living room windows caught the silver strands in her dark hair, creating a halo effect that made her seem oddly vulnerable. "It's about my grandson, Michael," she began, smoothing the envelope on her lap with trembling fingers. "He's been accepted into a special program for gifted young artists in New York. It's an incredible opportunity, but..." She paused, taking a shaky breath. I handed her a steaming mug of coffee, waiting patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "His parents, my son and daughter-in-law, they died in a car accident 3 years ago. I've been raising him since then, but lately..." Sarah's voice cracked. "I've been having some health issues, nothing terminal," she added quickly, seeing my concerned expression. "But I need surgery, and the recovery will take months. Michael's program starts in 2 weeks. The weight of what she was about to ask hung in the air between us. I took a sip of my own coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me in the moment. "James, I know this is enormous and we barely know each other, but would you consider being Michael's temporary guardian while I recover? He's 16, responsible, and mostly self-sufficient. He just needs a stable adult presence, someone to make sure he's okay while I get back on my feet." The request hit me like a physical force. Me? A guardian? I was a 34-year-old software developer who could barely keep houseplants alive. My experience with teenagers was limited to occasionally awkward conversations with my nieces during holiday dinners. Yet something in Sarah's eyes, a mixture of desperation and hope, made it impossible to immediately refuse. "Tell me more about Michael," I heard myself say. Sarah's face softened, a ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "He's special. Not just his art, though that's extraordinary. He has this way of seeing the world that reminds me so much of his father. He's quiet, like me, but there's an intensity to him. When he focuses on something, a painting, a problem, a person, it's like the rest of the world falls away." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sketchbook, handling it with reverence. As she flipped through the pages, I found myself leaning forward, captivated by the images that emerged. Landscapes that seemed to pulse with hidden energy. Portraits that captured not just faces, but souls. And scattered throughout, quick sketches of everyday moments transformed into something magical. A coffee cup casting an impossible shadow, a tree whose branches spelled out poetry in negative space. "This is incredible," I murmured, genuinely impressed. "He did all of this?" Sarah nodded, pride momentarily overshadowing her worry. The program in New York, it could change his life. Give him opportunities I never could. But if I can't find someone to look after him while I recover... She left the sentence unfinished, but its implications were clear. I sat back, running a hand through my hair as my mind raced through the possibilities. My job was flexible. I worked remotely for a tech company that valued results over rigid schedules. My 3-bedroom house had plenty of space, with one room serving as my office and another collecting dust as a barely used guest room. Financially, I was stable. But was I capable of being responsible for a teenager, even a supposedly self-sufficient one? "How long would the recovery take?" I asked, buying time to process. "The doctors estimate 3 to 4 months. I know it's a lot to ask." Sarah began, but I held up a hand. Could I meet him first? Before making a decision? Relief flooded Sarah's face. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. "Of course. He's actually in the backyard right now, working on a new piece. Would you like to meet him?" I nodded, setting down my coffee cup. As we stood, Sarah touched my arm lightly. "Thank you, James. Just for considering this. I know we're practically strangers, but sometimes the best family is the one we choose." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. Chapter 2. The Artist's Eye. Michael was nothing like I expected. In my mind I had pictured a brooding teenager, perhaps wearing all black and radiating angst. Instead I found a lanky boy in paint-splattered jeans and a faded blue t-shirt, completely absorbed in a large canvas propped against Sarah's fence. He didn't notice our approach at first, and I took the opportunity to observe him. His movements were precise, almost surgical, as he applied paint to the canvas. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, the absolute focus, the way his entire body seemed to participate in each brush stroke. "Michael," Sarah called softly, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." He turned, and I was struck by how much he resembled his grandmother. They shared the same thoughtful dark eyes and quiet intensity. Paint smudged his cheek, and his black hair stuck up in unruly spikes, but there was a maturity in his gaze that belied his 16 years. "This is James, our neighbor," Sarah continued, "the one I told you about." Michael wiped his hands on his jeans and extended one toward me. "Nice to meet you officially, Mr. Harrison. I've seen you working in your garden sometimes. You're not very good at it." I couldn't help but laugh at his blunt assessment. "No, I'm really not. Please, call me James." "Would you like to see what I'm working on?" he asked, gesturing to the canvas. There was no self-consciousness in the invitation, just a simple desire to share. I stepped closer, and my breath caught. The painting was unlike anything in the sketchbook. It showed a city street, but not as it existed in reality. The buildings curved and flowed like liquid metal, their windows reflecting impossible colors. The sky above was a tapestry of interconnected patterns that somehow suggested both order and chaos. And walking through this dreamlike landscape were figures that seemed to be simultaneously dissolving and coming into sharper focus. "It's about transition," Michael explained, watching my reaction, "how nothing stays the same, but change isn't always bad. See these figures?" He pointed to the shifting forms. "They're becoming more real even as they break apart. Like a caterpillar in a cocoon, you have to come undone before you can transform." I glanced at Sarah, who was watching our interaction with barely concealed hope. Her grandson wasn't just talented, he was extraordinary. The thought of such potential being derailed by circumstances beyond his control suddenly seemed unbearable. "Do you want to see my studio?" Michael asked, interrupting my thoughts. It's really just the garage, but Grandma let me convert it. I'd like that very much, I replied. The garage had indeed been transformed. Every surface was covered with artwork in various stages of completion. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies organized with surprising precision. A laptop sat on a small desk in the corner, surrounded by art history books and sketching tutorials. I do my schoolwork here too, Michael explained. Online classes, they're okay, but... He trailed off, his expression darkening slightly. But they're not the same as being around other artists, I suggested. He nodded emphatically. The program in New York, it's not just classes. There would be other people like me, people who understand why I spend hours getting a single shadow right, or why sometimes I have to get up at 3 a.m. because an idea won't let me sleep. Michael, Sarah interjected gently. James hasn't agreed to anything yet. We shouldn't pressure him. I know, Michael said quickly. I wanted you to see, to understand. And I did understand. More than either of them knew. I remembered being 16, burning with passion for something that seemed just out of reach. In my case, it had been programming, the way code could create something from nothing, the elegant logic of well-written software. I remembered the adults who had helped make my dreams possible, and those who had dismissed them as impractical. Could we talk more about the logistics? I asked, turning to Sarah, the practical details of how this would work. For the next hour, we sat in Sarah's kitchen, discussing schedules, responsibilities, and expectations. Michael would need to be driven to and from his classes in the city 3 times a week. He had a strict routine for his online schoolwork, which he managed independently but needed occasional oversight. Sarah had saved enough to cover his expenses, including art supplies and transportation. I'm not looking for a replacement parent, Michael said suddenly, interrupting a discussion about curfews. I just need someone to sign forms and make sure I don't burn the house down while trying to heat up ramen at midnight. Sarah made a small distressed sound, but I laughed. That's oddly specific. Is there a story there? Michael grinned, the first real smile I'd seen from him. Let's just say I learned some valuable lessons about microwave safety. As the afternoon light began to fade, I found myself running out of questions and excuses. The practical obstacles weren't insurmountable. The real question was more fundamental. Was I willing to take this leap into the unknown? I looked at Sarah, still elegant despite her obvious exhaustion, then at Michael, with his paint-stained hands and eyes full of carefully guarded hope. Something shifted inside me, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. I'll need to make some changes to the guest room, I heard myself say, and we should probably set up a proper study space in my office. The lighting's better there than in the garage. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Michael sat very still, his expression a complex mixture of relief, excitement, and fear. Really? He whispered. You'll do it? I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of the decision. Really. But I have 2 conditions. They both looked at me expectantly. First, you have to promise to be patient with me. I've never done anything like this before, and I'm probably going to make mistakes. That's fair, Michael said solemnly. What's the second condition? You have to teach me how to paint. Not like you. I don't have that kind of talent, but maybe just enough so I stop killing my garden and start making it beautiful instead. The smile that broke across Michael's face was like sunrise after a long night. Deal, he said, extending his hand again. This time when we shook, It felt like sealing more than just an agreement. It felt like the beginning of something important. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my free hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving him a chance." As I walked home that evening, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. I looked exactly the same as I had that morning, yet everything had changed. Tomorrow I would begin preparing for my new role as temporary guardian to a teenage art prodigy. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, I felt a surprising sense of rightness, as if I had unknowingly been preparing for this moment all along. Sometimes, I realized, the most life-changing favors aren't just about helping others. Sometimes they're about allowing ourselves to be changed in return. Chapter 3. First Days. The morning Michael moved in, I woke before dawn. My guest room, now his room, had been transformed over the past week. Fresh paint on the walls, a warm gray he had chosen, a proper desk beneath the window, and storage solutions for his art supplies. Still, as I stood in the doorway waiting for their arrival, it felt simultaneously like too much and not enough. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky when Sarah's car pulled into my driveway. Michael emerged first, arms full of sketchbooks, while Sarah directed the moving company we'd hired to handle the larger items. I watched them unload his bed, dresser, and most importantly, his easel. Each piece a fragment of his old life, transitioning into this new arrangement. "The light is different here," were Michael's first words after entering his new room. He stood by the window, head tilted slightly, studying how the morning sun cast shadows across the hardwood floor. "It'll change how the colors look. I'll need to adjust." "I hadn't considered that." "Is that bad?" He shook his head, already pulling out a sketchbook. "Different isn't bad. It's just new, like everything else." Sarah lingered after the movers left, helping Michael arrange his space while simultaneously instructing me on 1,000 small details. His favorite foods, his medication schedule, just vitamins and allergy pills, the best way to get him out of bed on Monday mornings, the promise of pancakes, apparently. Finally, she ran out of reasons to stay. I watched as she hugged Michael tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. Then, to my surprise, she hugged me too. "Remember," she said softly, "you can call me anytime. Both of you." After she left, Michael and I stood in awkward silence, two people suddenly sharing a space without the buffer of Sarah's familiar presence. "So," I ventured, "pancakes." He smiled but shook his head. "Actually, could you show me your office, where I'll be studying? I want to start setting up my laptop, get a feel for the space." "Of course," I replied, relieved to have a concrete task to focus on. Though I should warn you, it's a bit chaotic. My office, like most of my house, reflected my bachelor lifestyle. Functional, but not particularly welcoming. Dual monitors displayed lines of code, coffee cups clustered on every surface, and sticky notes covered one wall in what I liked to pretend was an organized system. Michael surveyed the room with an artist's eye. "The lighting is good," he noted, "but the energy's all wrong for focused work. Too scattered." He turned to me. "Would you mind if I made some adjustments?" 2 hours later, my office had been transformed. Michael had rearranged the furniture to create 2 distinct workspaces, each with its own character but somehow harmoniously connected. My coding station remained largely untouched, but he'd cleared the sticky notes, replacing them with a sleek whiteboard system. His study area occupied what had been dead space by the window, now feeling both separate and integrated. "The key," he explained, stepping back to examine our work, "is to create flow. Every space tells a story. Right now, this room was telling 10 different stories at once. We just helped it focus on the main narrative. I looked around, impressed despite myself. And what narrative is that? Two people, different but compatible, sharing space to create something new. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. At least that's what I was going for. The rest of the day passed in similar activities, small adjustments that slowly transformed my house from a bachelor pad into something else. Michael had an uncanny ability to spot what wasn't working in a space and find simple solutions. By evening, when we finally collapsed on the couch with pizza, my home felt more welcoming than it had in years. "Thank you," I said as Michael reached for another slice, "for helping make this place better." He paused, pizza halfway to his mouth. "Thanks for giving me the chance to help." After a moment, he added, "I was worried, you know, that I'd feel like a guest here, like I was imposing. But this feels more like collaboration." "That's exactly what it is," I agreed. "We're figuring this out together." Later that night, as I was heading to bed, I heard soft music coming from Michael's room. Not the loud beats I'd expected from a teenager, but something classical, accompanied by the gentle scratch of pencil on paper. I smiled, realizing that Sarah had been right. Michael wasn't just talented, he was special. My last thought before sleep was that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely unprepared for this after all. Chapter 4. The First Challenge. The illusion that this would be easy lasted exactly 3 days. On Wednesday morning, I found Michael's room empty, his bed unslept in, and a note on his desk that made my heart stop. "Gone to catch the sunrise from the pier. Back for online classes. M." The rational part of my brain knew he was probably fine. The pier was only 15 minutes away, and Michael was responsible. But the newly awakened guardian part of my brain immediately conjured images of every possible disaster. I grabbed my keys, barely remembering to put on shoes before rushing out the door. I found him exactly where he said he'd be, perched on the edge of the pier with his sketchbook, completely absorbed in capturing the way the rising sun painted the water in shades of gold and pink. Relief warred with irritation as I approached. "You can't just disappear like that," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Michael looked up, genuine surprise on his face. "I left a note. A note that didn't say when you left, didn't mention you were taking your bike in the dark, and didn't include your phone number in case something happened." "Oh." He closed his sketchbook slowly. I've been doing this for months. Grandma knows I like to sketch the sunrise." "Did you tell her every time?" He had the grace to look sheepish. "Number." But she could see the pier from her bedroom window. I sat down beside him, letting my feet dangle over the water. "I'm not trying to restrict your freedom, Michael, but part of my job is knowing you're safe. We need to establish some ground rules." He nodded, fingers tracing the edges of his sketchbook. "I'm not used to explaining myself," he admitted. "Art doesn't really follow schedules. Sometimes you just have to capture a moment before it's gone." Looking at the sunrise he'd been sketching, I could understand the impulse. The colors were extraordinary, the kind of natural beauty that demanded to be preserved. "What if we compromise?" I suggested. "You can still chase your moments, but I need 3 things. Advance notice when possible, your phone on and charged, and regular check-ins if you're out alone." "Deal?" "Deal." He hesitated, then opened his sketchbook. "Want to see what was worth getting up at 4 a.m. for?" The sketch took my breath away. He'd captured not just the colors of the sunrise, but its emotion, the peaceful solitude of early morning, the promise of a new day. In the corner, almost hidden, was a small figure on a bicycle, racing toward the light. "Is that you?" I asked, pointing to the figure. He nodded. "Sometimes you have to chase the light, even if it means getting up early, even if it means taking risks." He glanced at me. "But maybe it's nice to have someone watching out for you while you do." We sat in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, watching boats begin their daily journeys across the harbor. Finally, Michael closed his sketchbook and stood. "We should head back. I have class in an hour and you probably have work." "I do," I agreed, checking my watch. "But maybe first we could grab breakfast. I know a place that does amazing breakfast burritos." His face lit up. "Really? Even though I scared you? Especially because you scared me. I think we both could use the food. Besides," I added with a smile, "I want to hear more about these sunrise sketches of yours." As we walked back to where I'd parked, Michael talking animatedly about his favorite early morning spots, I realized something important. This wasn't just about setting rules or ensuring safety. It was about learning to balance structure and freedom, responsibility and creativity. We were both learning as we went. That afternoon I installed a whiteboard in the kitchen. Together we created a system, a space for schedules and another for spontaneous plans, with a section dedicated to artist's intentions, where Michael could note his creative impulses. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Sarah called that evening to check in. When I told her about the morning's adventure, she laughed. "Welcome to life with an artist," she said warmly. "Just wait until he discovers the full moon over the beach. At least you got the sunrise as practice." After we hung up, I added "full moon watch" to our calendar, marking it with a question mark. Better to be prepared. Chapter 5. The first day. The morning of Michael's first day at the art program dawned gray and drizzly. I found him already awake at 5 a.m., surrounded by scattered art supplies in the kitchen. "I can't find my good charcoal," he said without looking up. "The Italian kind. I had it yesterday." "It's in your blue case," I replied, starting the coffee maker. "You packed it last night. Triple-checked." He stilled, then let out a shaky breath. "Right. Sorry, I'm just nervous. Terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if everyone else is better? What if—" I placed a mug of hot chocolate in front of him, a comfort drink Sarah had mentioned. "What if you're exactly where you're supposed to be?" Michael wrapped his hands around the mug, inhaling the sweet aroma. "Grandma would say that. Smart woman, your grandmother." I checked my phone. "We should leave in 30 minutes to beat traffic. Want to help me make breakfast?" Cooking together had become our morning ritual over the past 2 weeks. Michael had an artist's precision with measurements, making him a surprisingly good baker. By the time we finished our breakfast burritos, his with extra avocado, mine with extra hot sauce, some of the tension had left his shoulders. The drive into New York was quiet, Michael sketching absently in his notebook while I navigated traffic. The program was housed in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, its brick exterior adorned with stunning murals. "Previous students," Michael whispered, eyes wide as he took in the artwork. "They let the top students paint one section each year. We were early, but other students were already arriving." Michael's grip on his portfolio tightened as we watched them enter. Teenagers carrying canvases, digital tablets, and art supplies, all radiating the same mix of excitement and anxiety. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded, though he didn't move. "Hey," I said softly, "remember what you told me about the sunrise? Sometimes you have to chase the light." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Even if it means taking risks." "Exactly." and I'll be right here at 4 p.m. to hear all about it." Michael took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and opened the car door. As he walked toward the entrance, portfolio under his arm, I saw him straighten to his full height. Just before he reached the door, he turned and gave me a quick wave. I waited until he was inside before pulling away, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. Was this how parents felt on the first day of school? This strange mixture of pride, worry, and hope. The day crawled by. I tried to focus on work, but found myself checking my phone constantly. At noon, Michael sent a text. Made it through first critique. Didn't throw up. Teacher liked my Sunrise series. Working on new project now. Thanks for the extra granola bar. I smiled, remembering how I'd slipped it into his bag that morning. Another thing I'd learned from Sarah. Artists often forget to eat when they're in the zone. At 3:45, I was parked outside the warehouse again. Students began emerging in small groups, their energy distinctly different from the morning. More relaxed, many clutching new works, or talking animatedly about techniques and projects. Michael appeared at 4:05, practically bouncing with excitement. He threw his portfolio in the back seat and launched into a detailed description of his day before I could even ask. And then Ms. Rivera, she's the color theory teacher. She showed us this technique for layering transparencies that I've never even thought of. And there's this girl, Emma, who does these amazing digital traditional hybrids. And did you know you can use coffee as a painting medium? And... He paused for breath. "Sorry, I'm talking too much." "Not at all," I assured him, grinning as I pulled into traffic. "Tell me more about the coffee painting." The entire ride home was filled with enthusiastic explanations of new techniques, descriptions of his classmates' work, and plans for projects he wanted to try. His earlier nervousness had transformed into pure creative energy. "Oh," he exclaimed as we neared home, "I almost forgot. We're supposed to do a piece about family for next week. Would you mind if I painted you? And Grandma too, of course." The question caught me off guard. "Me? Are you sure?" "Yeah. The assignment is about how we see family, and your..." He trailed off, suddenly finding his sketchbook fascinating. "Your kind of family now, if that's okay." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "That's definitely okay." "Cool," he said quickly, clearly embarrassed by the emotional moment, "but you'll have to sit still for at least an hour. Think you can handle that?" "I'll do my best, as long as you don't make me look too shabby next to your grandmother." He laughed. "No promises. She has better posture." That evening after dinner, I called Sarah to share the day's success. As I described Michael's excitement, his new friends, and his plans for the family portrait, I could hear her crying softly. "Happy tears," she assured me. "Thank you, James, for giving him this chance, for being there." "He's amazing," I said simply. "You did good, Sarah." After we hung up, I found Michael in his room, already working on sketches for the family portrait. He had reference photos of Sarah spread across his desk, and I noticed he'd snuck a few candid shots of me as well. "Need anything?" I asked from the doorway. He shook his head, then paused. "Actually, could you sit in that chair for a minute? The light's perfect right now, and I want to get the shadows right." I settled into the chair, trying to stay still. "Like this?" "Perfect," he said, pencil flying across the paper. "Just be yourself." As I sat there, watching him work in the fading daylight, I realized something profound. In trying to help Michael chase his light, I'd somehow found my own. Chapter 6. The Family Portrait. The Family Portrait project became more than just an assignment. It evolved into a journey of self-discovery for all of us. Michael approached it with an intensity I hadn't seen before, spending hours on preliminary sketches and color studies. "It's not just about getting the faces right," he explained one evening as we sat in his studio space, formerly my garage. "It's about capturing the essence of what makes us family." I watched as he worked, amazed by how his hands moved with such certainty across the canvas. He'd chosen to paint Sarah and me in a moment I hadn't even realized he'd observed. The two of us sitting at my kitchen table, heads bent together over his class schedule, coffee mugs forgotten between us. The sketch captured something profound in our postures, the way we both leaned forward, completely focused on creating the best future for him. "When was this?" I asked, pointing to the reference sketch. "The day before I moved in," he said, not looking up from his work. "I came downstairs to get water and saw you both through the doorway. It was the moment I knew this could actually work." The painting took shape over several days. Michael insisted on working from life as much as possible, which meant I spent many evenings sitting still while he captured just one more detail. Sarah came over when she felt strong enough, her recovery progressing steadily but slowly. "You've made this place feel like home," she observed during one sitting, looking around at how the house had changed. Art supplies had migrated into every room, sketchbooks appeared on every surface, and the walls now hosted a rotating gallery of Michael's works in progress. The final piece was stunning. Michael had painted us in his signature style, realistic, but with an element of magical realism. The kitchen table floated in a space that was both my house and somewhere else entirely, domestic objects transforming into symbols around us. Sarah's coffee mug spilled stars instead of liquid, while mine grew tiny computer circuits up its side. The light between us seemed to bend and flow, connecting our figures in subtle ways. But it was our expressions that took my breath away. He'd captured Sarah's mix of strength and vulnerability, the way she held herself with dignity even while recovering. And somehow, he'd seen something in me I hadn't recognized in myself. A kind of quiet determination, a gentleness I didn't know I possessed. When he presented it in class, the response was overwhelming. Ms. Rivera, his art teacher, called it a masterful exploration of chosen family and transformed spaces. Michael came home that day practically glowing with pride. "They want to include it in the student showcase next month," he announced over dinner. "But I wanted to check if that's okay with both of you first, since it's, personal." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "We'd be honored," I said, and Sarah nodded in agreement. "Just one thing," she added with a smile. "I want a print for my room at the rehabilitation center. The nurses keep asking to see your work." That night, after Sarah had gone home and Michael had finally gone to bed, I stood in front of the painting again. It struck me how much had changed since that first morning when Sarah knocked on my door. We were no longer just neighbors helping each other out of necessity. We had become something else entirely, something captured perfectly in Michael's brushstrokes, something that defied conventional labels but was undeniably real. Family, I was learning, could be built with brushstrokes as easily as blood. Chapter 7. The Storm. October brought an unexpected challenge. A massive storm system hit the coast, causing widespread power outages. I was prepared for the basics: flashlights, batteries, non-perishable food. What I hadn't anticipated was how the loss of electricity would affect an artist who primarily worked in the evenings. "I can't see the colors properly," Michael fretted, pacing our darkened living room. "The shadows are all wrong, and I have a project due next week." I watched him by the light of our emergency lanterns, reminded suddenly of how young he still was, despite his usual maturity. Maybe we need to approach this differently, I suggested. What if instead of fighting the darkness, you worked with it? He paused mid-pace. What do you mean? Well, you're always talking about how different lighting changes how we see things. Maybe this is an opportunity to explore that. What does art look like when you can't rely on your usual tools? Michael considered this, then grabbed his sketchbook. Can you help me set up some of the lanterns? I want to try something. For the next few hours, we experimented with shadow play. Michael discovered that the emergency lanterns created interesting effects when arranged in different patterns. He began sketching the shadows cast by simple objects, then moved on to more complex arrangements. It's like seeing everything new again, he murmured, lost in his work. The darkness makes you focus on shapes rather than details. It's freeing, actually. When Sarah called to check on us, she had stayed at the rehabilitation center where they had generator power. Michael excitedly told her about his shadow studies. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm. Sometimes limitations can be the best teachers. James helped me figure that out, Michael replied, shooting me a quick smile. He's good at finding different ways to look at problems. The power outage lasted 3 days. In that time, Michael filled an entire sketchbook with studies in shadow and light. When he finally returned to his regular project, something had shifted in his approach. The darkness taught me to see differently, he explained to his class during critique. Sometimes you have to lose what you rely on to discover what you're capable of. Ms. Rivera was so impressed with his shadow studies that she encouraged him to develop them into a larger series. Art isn't just about what we can see clearly, she told him. It's also about finding beauty in the uncertain spaces between light and dark. The experience changed something between Michael and me as well. He began asking for my perspective more often, not just about art, but about life in general. I found myself sharing stories from my own journey, the challenges I'd faced in my career, the times I'd had to adapt and find new approaches. Do you ever miss your old life? He asked one evening as we sat on the porch, watching another storm roll in. You know, before all this. I considered the question carefully. I miss certain things. The simplicity, maybe, the predictability, but missing something doesn't mean you regret the changes that came after. He nodded, sketching absently in his ever-present notebook. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how change can be scary, but also necessary, like how the storm forced me to try new things. Exactly. And sometimes the scariest changes lead to the best growth. Like saying yes to a teenager you barely knew, he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Like saying yes to becoming family with two of the most remarkable people I've ever met. I corrected gently. Michael didn't respond, but the next day I found a new sketch on my desk. A simple study in light and shadow, showing two figures sitting on a porch, their shapes merging with the approaching storm. Underneath, he'd written, "Sometimes the best families are born in darkness." Chapter 8. Sarah's Return. The day Sarah was cleared to leave the rehabilitation center coincided with Michael's first major showcase at the art program. We had planned to pick her up in the morning, giving her time to rest, before attending the evening event, but Sarah insisted on helping with the preparations. "I've been resting for months," she declared, as she settled into our kitchen with remarkable familiarity. "Besides, I want to see how you two have been living." Her eyes took in the changes to my house, now our house. Art supplies had found permanent homes in carefully organized spaces. The walls hosted a rotating gallery of Michael's work. Even my coding space had evolved, incorporating elements of his artistic influence in its layout. "You've created something beautiful here," she said softly, running her hand along the kitchen counter where Michael's sketchbooks mingled with my coffee mugs. Something more than just a temporary arrangement. "We learned from the best," I replied, watching as she explored the space that had once been solely mine. Michael's made me see everything differently. The way light falls, how spaces flow, the importance of making room for creativity. Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of something else in her expression. Not quite sadness, but a recognition of change. "He does that. Changes the way you see the world. James ... She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I hope you know that this, what you've done for him, for us, it goes beyond any favor." Before I could respond, Michael burst into the kitchen, his arms full of new sketches. "Grandma, you have to see these. Ms. Rivera helped me develop that shadow series into something completely new, and—" He stopped, noticing the emotion in the room. "Is everything okay?" Sarah opened her arms, and Michael went to her without hesitation, sketches scattering across the floor. They held each other for a long moment, and I turned to give them privacy, but Sarah's hand shot out to grab mine, pulling me into their embrace. "Family hug," she declared firmly. "We all need this." Later, as we prepared for the showcase, I watched Sarah help Michael select which pieces to display. Their artistic shorthand was fascinating. References to techniques and styles I was still learning. Memories of shared moments captured in paint and charcoal. "Should we include the family portrait?" Michael asked, gesturing to the piece that had earned him so much praise. "Definitely," I said from the doorway. "It's where this all began, in a way." The showcase was held in the converted warehouse space that housed the art program. Student works filled the industrial space, transformed by careful lighting and thoughtful arrangement. Michael's section drew consistent attention, his unique style standing out even among the talented cohort. I stood back, watching as he confidently discussed his work with visitors. Sarah beside me, leaning slightly on her cane, but radiating pride. "He's flourishing," she murmured, "not just as an artist, but as a person. You've given him space to grow in all the ways he needed." "We did that together," I corrected. "All of us." Ms. Rivera approached, her smile warm as she greeted Sarah. "Your grandson has extraordinary talent," she said, "but more than that, he has something many young artists lack, a strong foundation. A sense of security that allows him to take creative risks." As they discussed Michael's progress, I wandered over to where he stood before the family portrait, lost in thought. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I asked. "I'm thinking about redoing it," he said, surprising me. "Not replacing this one, but creating a new version, one that shows how things are now." "What's different?" He gestured to where Sarah stood talking with his teacher, then to me, then to the space we'd created together. "Everything, nothing. It's hard to explain. When I painted this, we were 3 people figuring out how to fit together. Now we're just us. Family." "I'd love to see that," I said. "The new version." He nodded, already sketching in his mind. "It'll be different. Better, I think. More true." That night, after the showcase, we sat in our living room, Sarah in her favorite armchair, Michael sprawled on the floor with his sketchbook, me making late-night coffee for us adults. The conversation flowed easily, full of laughter and shared memories. "You know," Sarah said during a lull, "when I first asked you for this favor, James, I never imagined." "Neither did I admitted. "But sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming." Michael looked up from his sketching. "Like finding out your neighbor is secretly cool, even if he can't tell cobalt blue from cerulean." "I'm learning," I protested, making them both laugh. "Yes, Sarah said, her eyes twinkling. Exactly like that. Chapter 9. The Future Canvas. 1 year after that first knock on my door, we gathered in the backyard to celebrate multiple milestones. Sarah's full recovery, Michael's completion of the art program, and the news that had arrived that morning. His acceptance to a prestigious summer art intensive in Paris. The yard had been transformed, much like everything else in our lives. Michael's artistic touch was everywhere. Strings of handmade paper lanterns crisscrossed overhead, each painted with memories from our year together. The garden, once my failed attempt at domesticity, now thrived under Sarah's expert care. And the garage-turned studio had its doors wide open, displaying Michael's latest works. "I can't believe you're actually letting me go to Paris," Michael said, helping me set up the tables for dinner. "I mean, I know I'm almost 18, but—" "Letting you?" I laughed. "Michael, you earned this. Your talent, your hard work. This is all you." "But you helped make it possible?" he insisted. "Both of you did, and—" He hesitated, fiddling with a napkin. "I've been thinking about something, about the house." "What about it?" "Well, technically, Grandma's house is still next door, empty, and I know you two have talked about her moving back, but—" He took a deep breath. "What if we didn't change anything? What if this just stayed our home, all of us?" Before I could respond, Sarah emerged from the house carrying a covered canvas. "Perfect timing," she announced. "Michael, James, I have something to show you both." She positioned the canvas on an easel we used for outdoor painting sessions. "I've been taking art classes," she revealed, surprising us both. "At the community center. I'm not very good, but I wanted to try seeing the world the way my grandson does." She unveiled the painting, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. It was our house, not as it existed in reality, but as it lived in our hearts. The walls were transparent, showing all three of us in our natural habitats. Michael in his studio, me at my computer, Sarah in her garden. But the boundaries between these spaces blurred and flowed into each other, creating a single, harmonious whole. "Sarah," I whispered. "It's beautiful." "It's us," Michael added, his eyes shining. "It's exactly us." "I started this painting when I was still in rehabilitation," Sarah explained. "At first it was just to pass the time. But as I worked on it, I realized something. This arrangement we made, it stopped being temporary a long time ago." She turned to me. "James, you opened your home to us, but more than that, you opened your heart. You became family in every way that matters." "And you," she continued, facing Michael, "you taught us both how to see the world differently, how to find beauty in unexpected places, how to turn challenges into opportunities for growth." "So," she concluded, "if you're both amenable, I'd like to make this official. My house next door. I want to sell it. Use the money to add a proper studio to this house. Maybe expand the garden. Make this our permanent home. All of us." The silence that followed was full of emotion. Michael moved first, hugging his grandmother tightly. Then he reached out and pulled me in, just as Sarah had done months before. "Family hug," he said, echoing her words from that day. "We all need this." Later that evening, as our friends and neighbors joined us to celebrate, I found myself standing in the doorway of my house, our house, watching the scene before me. Michael was showing his newest works to his art teachers, his confidence a beautiful thing to behold. Sarah sat with neighbors, sharing stories and plans for expanding her garden. The space was full of light, laughter, and love. I thought back to that morning a year ago, when a simple knock had changed everything. I'd thought I was doing a favor, temporary and bounded. Instead, I'd been given the greatest gift, a family built on choice rather than chance, strengthened by challenges and painted with strokes of love, trust, and understanding. "Deep thoughts?" Sarah asked, appearing beside me. "Happy ones?" I replied, just thinking about how sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest moments. "Like opening a door?" She smiled. "Like opening a heart," I corrected. Michael joined us, sketchbook in hand as always. "I want to capture this," he said, already drawing. The three of us in the doorway of our home. The light is perfect. And it was. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that even Michael would find challenging to replicate, casting long shadows that danced with the light from our paper lanterns. But more than that, the moment itself was perfect. Three people who had become family, standing on the threshold between what was and what would be. "You know what this reminds me of?" Michael asked, his pencil moving swiftly across the paper. "That first family portrait. Remember how nervous I was about showing it? And now look at you." Sarah beamed. "Paris bound. But always coming home," he added firmly. "This is my anchor. You two, you're my anchor." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, we found ourselves back in our familiar positions. Sarah in her armchair, Michael on the floor with his sketchbook, me making coffee in the kitchen. But now there was a new painting on the wall. Sarah's vision of our home, hanging beside Michael's original family portrait. "So," I said, passing out coffee cups, "about this Paris trip. I was thinking maybe we could all go for part of it at least. I've never seen the Louvre." Michael's face lit up. "Really? All of us?" "Why not?" Sarah smiled. "Family vacation." "Family vacation," I echoed, the words feeling right in my mouth. Michael was already sketching, probably imagining us against Parisian backgrounds. Sarah was discussing which gardens we should visit, and I sat there, in our living room, marveling at how the simple act of saying yes to help a neighbor had painted my life in colors I never knew existed. Epilogue. 3 years later, the morning sun streams through the skylight of our expanded home, casting familiar patterns across the breakfast table. The house has grown with us. A proper studio extension for Michael, a greenhouse for Sarah's ever-expanding garden, and my office now perfectly balanced between technology and art. Michael is home from his second year at art school, his talent having earned him a full scholarship. At 20, he carries himself with quiet confidence, though he still gets that same intense focus when he's working on a piece. His latest series, exploring the concept of chosen family, has already garnered attention from galleries. "Remember when you couldn't tell the difference between cobalt and cerulean?" he teases, watching me organize his new supplies. 3 years of living with an artist have given me an education I never expected. "Remember when you thought coding was just typing randomly?" I counter, making him laugh. The truth is, we've all learned from each other. Sarah's garden now includes a sophisticated irrigation system I designed, monitored by an app Michael created in his spare time. My coding projects often incorporate artistic elements inspired by their influence, and Sarah has become quite proficient at digital art, her tablet constantly filled with new sketches. "The gallery called again," Sarah announces, joining us with fresh coffee. "They want to feature the family portrait series, all 3 versions." The paintings hang in our living room, the original from Michael's first art program, Sarah's version from our celebration, and the newest one Michael completed last month. Each tells the story of our evolution, from tentative connections to unshakable bonds. "Did I tell you Elena's coming to visit next week?" Michael asks, trying to sound casual. Elena, a fellow art student, has been a frequent topic of conversation lately. She wants to meet my family. Your very cool family, I remind him, earning an eye roll. The gallery opening is that weekend. Sarah muses. Perfect timing. The gallery opening. Sometimes it still amazes me how far we've come from that first hesitant request for help. Michael's work will be featured alongside established artists. His unique perspective on family, transformation, and connection resonating with viewers who've never met us, but somehow recognize their own stories in his brush strokes. Later that evening, as we sit in our favorite spots, Sarah in her armchair, Michael sketching, me with my laptop, I think about all the ways life can surprise you. How a simple knock on the door can lead to a complete reimagining of what family means. Hey, Michael says suddenly, looking up from his sketchbook. Did I ever thank you for saying yes that day? About 1,000 times, I reply. Well, here's 1001. He tears the page from his book and hands it to me. It's a quick sketch of the three of us, but with a twist. We're all sitting in our usual places, but our figures are composed of thousands of tiny yes words, flowing together to create our forms. In the background, a door stands open, light pouring through. Because sometimes, he explains, a single word can change everything. Sarah moves to look over my shoulder, her hand resting on my arm. It certainly changed us. I think about that day, about the woman who stood on my doorstep asking for help, about the scared but talented teenager who needed a chance, about the man I was then and who I've become. No, I say, looking at my family, it didn't change us. It revealed us. Michael adds the sketch to our wall of memories, ticket stubs from his first gallery show, photos from our Paris trip, Sarah's gardening awards, my tech conference presentations, and countless moments in between. Each piece tells part of our story, but together they create something greater, a portrait of a family that chose each other, day after day, yes after yes. Outside, the sun sets on another ordinary day in our extraordinary life. Sarah heads to her greenhouse to check on her latest experimental blooms. Michael settles in for an evening of creating, his music mixing with the gentle hum of my keyboard. And I sit here, in the home we've built together, marveling at how the biggest adventures often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes all it takes is opening a door. Sometimes all it takes is saying yes. Sometimes all it takes is letting love paint your life in colors you never knew existed. James's growing understanding of both art and guardianship, and the unexpected ways their lives become intertwined. Each chapter builds on their developing relationship while exploring themes of trust, creativity, and personal growth. Exploring themes of found family, personal growth, and the transformative power of art. Through challenges and triumphs, James and Michael form a deep bond that ultimately enriches both their lives. Sarah's recovery becomes a journey of its own, as she learns to trust and let go while remaining an essential part of their unconventional family unit. The narrative weaves together multiple storylines. Michael's artistic development and experiences at the New York program. James learning to balance work, responsibility, and personal growth. Sarah's recovery and her evolving relationship with both Michael and James. The growing sense of family and community that develops between the three main characters. Each chapter builds upon these themes while maintaining emotional authenticity and exploring the complexities of human relationships. The story culminates in a powerful resolution that celebrates the unexpected ways people can come into our lives and change them forever. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life tales that will make you question everything you think you know.